Cool Hand Luke cast reveals what most fans never figured out. It's been called the ultimate anti-authority film, a performance that cemented Paul Newman as Hollywood's most magnetic rebel, a story that taught America the cost of breaking a man's spirit. Cool Hand Luke. For generations of movie lovers, this tale of defiance in the face of crushing institutional power ranks as one of the most emotionally devastating films ever made. But what if I told you that beneath its familiar surface lies a world of secrets that even the most dedicated fans have never uncovered? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Cool Hand Luke's most closely guarded mysteries, revelations straight from the cast and crew who brought this beloved story to life, the hidden meanings, the onset revelation, the symbolic details placed throughout the film that completely transform how you understand Luke Jackson's journey. From Newman's surprising confessions about his connection to Luke, to George Kennedy's dramatic transformation for his Oscar-winning role, to the deleted scenes that would have given the film an entirely different meaning, this is the untold story of Cool Hand Luke, and I promise you this, by the time we're done, you'll never see those mirrored sunglasses or hear failure to communicate the same way again. The film that defied Hollywood. Before we dive into the cast's revelations, we need to understand something remarkable. Cool Hand Luke wasn't supposed to be the film we know today. It was supposed to be safer, more conventional, and far less challenging to authority. Warner Brothers initially saw the project as a straightforward prison drama, entertaining but ultimately forgettable. What they didn't count on was director Stuart Rosenberg's determination to make something far more subversive. Rosenberg and screenwriter Frank Pearson envisioned a film that questioned not just prison conditions, but America's entire power structure at the height of the Vietnam War. Jack Lemmon originally owned the rights to the novel, but sold them after realizing he wasn't right for the lead role. When Paul Newman came aboard, the project gained the star power needed to push boundaries. Newman, already known for his counterculture sympathies, immediately recognized the film's potential to comment on the growing generational divide in America. Studio executives balked at the script's more overt criticisms of authority. In response, Rosenberg and Newman devised a brilliant strategy. They would make their anti-establishment film appear more conventional on the surface while embedding deeper messages throughout. The studio heads, focusing mainly on the straightforward prison escape narrative, missed the more profound critiques hidden in plain sight. As Newman later reflected, the beauty of Cool Hand Luke was that it allowed audiences to draw their own conclusions. Some people saw a Christ allegory, others saw a comment on Vietnam, and some just saw a great prison movie. But everyone understood that fundamental conflict between the individual and the institution. This resistance to Hollywood's traditional storytelling set the stage for what would become one of the most influential films of its era, a seemingly simple prison drama that carried a revolutionary message about the human spirit's refusal to be broken by systems of control. The real prison experience. One of the most crucial elements in creating the film's authentic atmosphere was the decision to film in harsh, realistic conditions. Unlike other prison films that were shot on comfortable sound stages, Cool Hand Luke was largely filmed on location in the sweltering heat of California's Central Valley and the San Joaquin River Delta region. The brutal chain gang sequences weren't just acting, they were filmed in punishing 100+ degree heat, with the actors performing actual physical labor. The production team constructed a temporary prison camp in Stockton, California, deliberately making it as uncomfortable and restrictive as possible. George Kennedy, who won an Oscar for his role as Dragline, revealed in his memoir that the conditions fundamentally changed the performances. We were really out there breaking rocks and tarring roads in that ungodly heat. After a few days, you didn't have to act exhausted or sunburned or filthy, you just were. It gave the film a level of realism you can't fake. The prison uniforms added to the authenticity. Made of heavy, unforgiving denim, they became stiff with sweat and dirt. The wardrobe department was instructed not to clean them regularly, allowing them to accumulate authentic grime and odor. Newman insisted his uniform remain unwashed throughout filming to maintain continuity and authenticity. Paul Newman, already known for his dedication to his craft, pushed himself to physical extremes during production. For scenes where Luke is punished by being forced to dig a hole and then fill it back in repeatedly, Newman performed the actual labor. The physical toll of these scenes was visible on screen, adding to the character's growing exhaustion. The physical challenges created an unexpected benefit: genuine bonding among the cast. The actors playing prisoners found themselves united against the elements in a way that mirrored their characters' solidarity against the prison system. They would often continue hanging out together after filming wrapped for the day, developing the kind of shorthand communication and group dynamics visible in the film's prison yard scenes. Director Stuart Rosenberg encouraged this camaraderie, understanding that it would translate to screen authenticity. He often kept the cameras rolling between takes, capturing natural moments of interaction among the exhausted actors that made their way into the final cut. This technique resulted in some of the film's film's most natural and compelling group dynamic. As Lou Antonio, Coco, later revealed, by the end of production, we weren't just portraying a prison gang, we had become one in many ways. We had our own hierarchy, our own inside joke, our own way of looking out for each other. That's something you see on screen that wasn't in the script. The characters behind the characters. What many viewers don't realize is that each of the main actors developed extensive backstories for their characters, details never explicitly mentioned in the film, but which informed every gesture, every line reading. Paul Newman approached Luke Jackson as far more than just another rebellious character. In interviews about his process, Newman revealed that he built Luke's backstory carefully, focusing on his military experience. Luke isn't just rebelling for the sake of rebellion, Newman explained. He's a decorated war veteran who came back to a society that had no place for the person the war had made him become. This military background, only briefly mentioned in the film, was central to Newman's understanding of the character. Luke's refusal to conform wasn't simple stubbornness, but came from having seen the absurdity of death and suffering in war. How could parking meter violations matter after that? Newman incorporated subtle military mannerisms into his performance. The way Luke stands at attention when first addressing the captain, precise bed-making technique, his ability to withstand physical punishment. George Kennedy underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation for his role as Dragline. Known primarily for playing tough military men and authority figures, Kennedy had to reimagine himself completely as the prison yard's alpha male with a surprising vulnerability. Kennedy actually gained weight for the role and studied the patterns of Southern convicts. Most importantly, he developed a detailed history of Dragline's crimes and prison life before Luke's arrival. "I decided Dragline had been in that prison for 12 years, Kennedy noted in his autobiography. He'd started as just another new fish, had fought his way to the top of the prisoner hierarchy, and now saw himself as a kind of benevolent king. Luke was the first man who truly challenged not just his physical dominance, but his entire worldview." Perhaps most fascinating is the preparation of Morgan Woodward, who played the silent, sunglasses-wearing boss Godfrey. Woodward, normally a talkative and friendly person, developed a pre-filming ritual where he would isolate himself for an hour, speaking to no one. Throughout the production, he maintained a deliberate distance from the actors playing prisoners, never socializing with them between takes. "I wanted them to feel uncomfortable around me, to never quite know what I was thinking," Woodward explained years later. "Those sunglasses weren't just a costume choice. They were a barrier that prevented anyone from knowing my thoughts. I wanted to be a mystery to them, something inhuman and unpredictable." These character choices represent how the actors infused their roles with detailed psychology that transformed Cool Hand Luke from a straightforward prison drama into a complex study of power, resistance, and human dignity. The religious symbolism most fans miss. Cool Hand. Luke is layered with Christian symbolism that many viewers, even devoted fans, completely miss on their first several viewings. Cast and crew have confirmed that these religious parallels were deliberately constructed throughout the film. The most obvious Christ imagery comes when Luke, after eating 50 eggs, lies on the table with his arms outstretched in a crucifixion pose. But this is just the most blatant of many such references. Director Stuart Rosenberg, who had studied theology before turning to filmmaking, carefully constructed a visual narrative that parallels Luke's journey with that of Jesus Christ. When Luke's mother, played by Jo Van Fleet, visits him, she sits atop her truck like a Madonna figure, while he stands below her, a visual reference to Michelangelo's Pietà. Her gift of cigarettes creates a halo of smoke around Luke, briefly transforming him in visual terms. Her parting words, "You know you ain't never coming back from this road," foreshadow his sacrifice just as Mary understood Jesus' fate. The famous car washing scene, where Luke playfully directs water to spray over a beautiful woman, Joy Harmon, functions as a baptism sequence. The scene's unusual dreamlike quality, shot with different lighting and pacing than the rest of the film, signals its symbolic rather than literal nature. It represents a moment of spiritual awakening for the prisoners, with Luke as their baptizer. Throughout the film, Luke is repeatedly punished for defying authority, much as Christ was scourged. The scene where he is brought back after his first escape attempt, beaten and broken, directly mirrors Christ's return after being tortured. Luke's famous line, "I ain't beat yet," echoes Christ's endurance through suffering. The film's most powerful religious imagery comes in its final moments. After Luke's death, his friend Dragline describes how Luke was smiling, suggesting a transcendent victory despite physical defeat. The final shot shows a crossroads photographed in a way that forms a crucifix image, superimposed with Luke's smiling face. The message is clear. Like Christ, Luke has been killed, but has triumphed spiritually over the system that destroyed him. Actor Paul Newman, who was Jewish, approached these Christian elements from a universal perspective. The religious imagery wasn't about promoting Christianity specifically, he once explained. It was about using a story most Americans would recognize to talk about sacrifice, about one person taking on suffering to inspire others. Luke becomes a sacrificial figure whose spirit continues after his body is destroyed. Screenwriter Frank Pearson later confirmed this intention. "We were using Christ imagery to show how systems of power respond to challenges with brutal suppression, but also how the human spirit can transcend that suppression. The bosses can kill Luke, but they can't kill what he represents to the other prisoners." This carefully crafted symbolism gives new meaning to Luke's famous line, "Nobody can eat 50 eggs." The challenge becomes not just a prison yard bet, but a kind of Last Supper, a communion that binds the prisoners together and elevates Luke from mere troublemaker to spiritual leader. The hidden political commentary. While Cool Hand Luke works brilliantly as a character study in prison drama, it was also a deliberate political statement about America during the Vietnam era. The film arrived in theaters in 1967, just as anti-war protests were reaching their peak and questions about institutional authority were dominating national conversation. Luke's backstory as a decorated war veteran who returns home only to be imprisoned for a minor offense directly commented on the treatment of Vietnam veterans. Like many real-life soldiers, Luke had been celebrated for acts of violence in war, but punished for much smaller transgressions in civilian life. His inability to respect arbitrary authority after witnessing the chaos of war reflected the growing disillusionment many veterans experienced. The film's prison camp setting functioned as a microcosm of American society. The captains and bosses represented governmental authority, while the prisoners stood in for everyday citizens whose freedoms were increasingly restricted. As screenwriter Frank Pearson noted in later interviews, "We were asking questions about what kind of society sends men to die in a war and then throws them away when they come home changed by the experience." The character of Boss Godfrey, the sunglasses-wearing man with no eyes, embodied the faceless institutional violence of the state. His silent, emotionless approach to brutality mirrored how many protesters viewed police and military actions against civilians. That he never speaks while inflicting punishment suggests an unquestioning enforcement of rules without moral consideration. Perhaps most subversively, the film questions the very concept of rehabilitation in both prisons and society. The captain's famous line about making inmates' minds right reflects how institutions often demand not just compliance, but internal conversion to their values. Luke's resistance isn't just against physical punishment, but against this demand for mental surrender. Contemporary reviewers largely miss these political dimensions, focusing instead on Newman's charismatic performance and the film's entertainment value. This oversight was partly by design. Director Stuart Rosenberg knew that wrapping political commentary in compelling storytelling would allow the message to reach audiences who might otherwise dismiss it. Paul Newman, more politically outspoken than many stars of his era, understood the film's subversive potential. "We were making a film about the struggle between the individual and the system at a time when that struggle was playing out on college campuses and in the streets, but we put it in a prison setting and set it slightly in the past so that audiences might absorb the message without feeling preached to." This political subtext helps explain why Cool Hand Luke has remained relevant far beyond its initial release. Its questions about institutional power, blind obedience, and the human cost of enforced conformity continue to resonate across changing political landscapes. The famous egg-eating scene, "The Truth Revealed." For many fans, the scene where Luke eats 50 eggs on a bet represents the heart of the film, a perfect encapsulation of his defiant spirit and the prisoner's need for hope and entertainment. This iconic sequence, adapted directly from Don Pierce's original novel, presented significant challenges for both the filmmakers and Paul Newman himself. The scene required careful planning to maintain continuity across multiple shooting days. Cinematographer Conrad Hall created a detailed shot list that would allow Newman to simulate the consumption of 50 eggs while actually eating only a fraction of that number. The production used a combination of camera angles, editing techniques, and prop eggs to create the illusion of the full consumption. Newman's commitment to authenticity did require him to consume a significant number of real eggs during filming, though far fewer than 50. The physical discomfort visible on his face in the later stages of the sequence wasn't entirely acting. The prolonged filming in heat while consuming eggs created genuine strain that the camera captured. Director Stuart Rosenberg understood that the egg-eating challenge represented more than just an arbitrary prison yard bet. In the context of the film's themes, it becomes a test of will against impossible odds, mirroring Luke's larger struggle against the prison system. The scene builds from comedy to near religious experience, as the other prisoners become increasingly invested in Luke's success. The scene's filming involved innovative camera techniques that weren't common in the 1960s. Cinematographer Conrad Hall used unusual angles and lighting to create the increasingly dreamlike quality as the challenge progresses. The circular arrangement of prisoners watching became more stylized, almost ritualistic, emphasizing the scene's function as a kind of communion. George Kennedy, who played Dragline, noted that the egg-eating scene fundamentally changed the dynamics among the actors. Before that scene, we were playing a collection of individuals. After filming it, something shifted. The group of actors playing prisoners began functioning more as a unit with Paul at the center. It mirrored what was happening to our characters in the story. The scene's symbolic meaning extends beyond the obvious Christ imagery. The 50 eggs represent an impossible task that becomes possible through sheer force of will, mirroring how Luke's ultimate goal of spiritual freedom seems impossible within the prison system, yet becomes attainable through his refusal to surrender his inner self. This combination of physical challenge, technical innovation, and symbolic meaning helps explain why the egg-eating scene remains one of the most memorable in cinema history, a sequence that functions simultaneously as entertainment, character development, and philosophical statement about the power of human determination. The sunglasses, more than just cool. Boss Godfrey's reflective sunglasses have become one of cinema's most iconic costume elements, but their significance goes far beyond creating a memorably intimidating character. The decision to have the prison guard wear mirrored aviators throughout the film was a deliberate symbolic choice that operates on multiple levels. Actor Morgan Woodward, who played the silent man with no eyes, revealed in a rare interview that the sunglasses were not initially part of the character description. Director Stuart Rosenberg suggested them during pre-production discussions about how to make Godfrey more menacing without resorting to typical villainous behaviors. The sunglasses created an immediate barrier between my character and everyone else, Woodward explained. You couldn't see my eyes, so you couldn't read my thoughts or emotions. That made Godfrey unpredictable and therefore frightening in a primal way. The reflective quality of the lenses serves a specific narrative purpose. When prisoners look at Boss Godfrey, they see themselves reflected back, a visual representation of how the prison system forces inmates to confront their own powerlessness. The sunglasses transform Godfrey from a person into a mirror for the prisoner's fear and subjugation. On a theological level, the sunglasses connect to the film's religious subtext. Godfrey becomes a dark inversion of God, an all-seeing presence who never speaks but passes judgment and inflicts punishment. His silence throughout the film, Woodward has no lines, reinforces this godlike quality. Like many conceptions of the divine, he observes without explanation and acts without warning. Cinematographer Conrad Hall used the sunglasses as a visual tool throughout the film. In several key scenes, he carefully arranged lighting to create reflections in the lenses, showing miniature versions of the prisoners or landscape. These reflections serve as visual foreshadowing, particularly in the final hunting scene where the glasses briefly reflect Luke before shots are fired. The sunglasses also function as a comment on institutional power. By hiding his eyes, Godfrey represents how systems of authority often conceal their true intentions and operate without transparency. He becomes the embodiment of impersonal force, authority without humanity or accountability. The cultural impact of these sunglasses extended far beyond the film itself. The aviator style, though not new, experienced a surge in popularity following Cool Hand Luke's release. More significantly, mirrored sunglasses became a standard visual shorthand in cinema for emotionless authority figures, particularly in films critical of police or military power. This multi-layered symbolism helps explain why Boss Godfrey remains one of cinema's most unsettling antagonists despite having no dialogue. The sunglasses transform him from a simple character into an archetypal representation of cold, unfeeling authority, a visual metaphor that continues to resonate with audiences decades after the film's release. The controversial original ending. While the ending of Cool Hand Luke powerfully concludes the film's themes, evidence suggests that alternative approaches were considered during production. The film's final moments, where Luke is shot off screen and Dragline reports to the other prisoners that Luke was smiling at the end, creates a deliberately ambiguous conclusion that has sparked debate among viewers for decades. In Don Pierce's original novel, Luke's fate is handled differently. Though the general outcome remains the same, the novel provides more explicit details about Luke's final moments. Adaptations from book to screen typically require modifications, and screenwriter Frank Pearson made significant changes to create a more cinematically effective ending. Director Stuart Rosenberg has acknowledged that several approaches to the final scenes were discussed during production. The challenge was finding the right balance, acknowledging the physical reality that systems of power typically crush individuals while still affirming Luke's spiritual victory. Too bleak an ending would undermine the film's message about the indomitability of the human spirit, while too optimistic a conclusion would feel false to the story's established world. The film's actual ending strikes this balance through suggestion rather than explicit depiction. By keeping Luke's death off-screen and filtering it through Dragline's perspective, the film allows for a spiritual interpretation of Luke's final moments. The smiling face superimposed over the crossroads imagery transforms what could have been merely a tragic conclusion into something more transcendent. This approach wasn't universally embraced by everyone involved in the production. Some cast members reportedly felt that a more explicit depiction of Luke's fate would have driven home the film's critique of institutional violence more effectively. Others argued that the more ambiguous approach actually strengthened the film's impact by forcing viewers to actively engage with its themes rather than passively witnessing a conclusion. Interestingly, Warner Brothers executives had their own concerns about the ending, though for different reasons. Studio notes from the production period suggest that some executives worried that killing the charismatic protagonist played by their biggest star would alienate audiences. They proposed more optimistic alternatives where Luke might survive or escape successfully. Rosenberg stood firm against these suggestions, understanding that Luke's physical defeat was essential to the film's thematic integrity. The compromise, keeping the death but presenting it indirectly, satisfied the studio's commercial concerns while preserving the story's artistic and philosophical core. Frank Pearson later reflected on the ending's effectiveness. By not showing Luke's actual death, we allow the audience to participate in creating meaning. Some viewers focus on the tragedy of Luke's destruction by the system, while others emphasize his spiritual victory. Both interpretations are valid, and that ambiguity gives the film continuing resonance. This carefully constructed ending helps explain why Cool Hand Luke has maintained such cultural impact. Rather than delivering a simple message about institutional cruelty or individual heroism, it creates a space for viewers to wrestle with complex questions about freedom, conformity, and what constitutes true victory when physical escape proves impossible. Newman's personal connection to Luke. While Paul Newman played many rebellious characters throughout his career, his connection to Luke Jackson went deeper than most. In interviews and reflections years after the film's release, Newman revealed how the character connected to his own personality and life philosophy in profound ways. Of all the characters I've played, Luke might be the closest to certain parts of myself, Newman admitted in a later interview. Not the criminal aspects, obviously, but that fundamental refusal to knuckle under to arbitrary authority. I've always had trouble with being told what to do without a good reason behind it. Newman's own military experience informed his portrayal. Like Luke, Newman had served in the Navy during World War II, though as an aviator rather than infantry. He understood the psychological adjustment required when returning from military service to civilian life and the potential for conflict when someone trained for war encounters petty civilian authorities. The actor's well-documented social activism and political views aligned with Luke's resistance to institutional power. Throughout the 1960s, Newman had become increasingly involved in progressive causes, supporting the civil rights movement and later opposing the Vietnam War. Cool Hand Luke provided a vehicle to express his concerns about authoritarian control and the suppression of individual freedom without making an explicitly political film. Newman's preparation for the role was unusually intensive, even by his meticulous standards. He spent time with author Don Pierce, who had actually served on a chain gang similar to the one depicted in the film. Newman absorbed not just the physical reality of prison labor, but the psychological mechanisms prisoners develop to maintain their sense of self under dehumanizing conditions. What made Luke such a pivotal role in Newman's career was how it balanced his movie star charisma with genuine vulnerability. As Newman explained, "Before Luke, I was often cast as the handsome rebel who always comes out on top somehow. Luke let me show what happens when the system is actually stronger than the individual, at least physically. But it also let me show that physical defeat doesn't have to mean spiritual defeat." The role represented a turning point in Newman's approach to acting. Following Cool Hand Luke, he increasingly sought characters with greater complexity and moral ambiguity, moving away from the more straightforward heroic roles of his early career. Films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, and later The Verdict all benefited from the more nuanced approach to characterization that Newman developed while playing Luke. Perhaps most telling is how Newman continued to reference the character decades later when discussing his own philosophy of life. When receiving Lifetime Achievement Awards in his later years, Newman often cited Luke as an example of the kind of determined resilience he admired, the willingness to get knocked down repeatedly but continue standing up. up. This personal resonance helps explain the exceptional quality of Newman's performance. Luke Jackson wasn't just another character for him, but a vehicle to express his own beliefs about individual dignity in the face of systems designed to crush it, a theme that would continue to define both his acting choices and his life outside of film. The cultural impact: failure to communicate. Few lines in cinema history have penetrated American consciousness more thoroughly than the captain's famous declaration, "What we've got here is failure to communicate." This single sentence, delivered with chilling precision by actor Strother Martin, transcended the film to become a widely recognized cultural touchstone that continues to be referenced more than 5 decades later. The line's power comes partly from its delivery. Martin, a character actor who specialized in portraying men with slight builds but outsized authority, delivers the line with a particular cadence that emphasizes its threatening undertone. The soft-spoken, almost regretful tone contrasts with the violence that follows, creating a disturbing dissonance that epitomizes institutional hypocrisy. Screenwriter Frank Pearson crafted the line as a distillation of how power structures justify their harshest actions. That line was meant to show how institutions blame the victims of their own brutality, Pearson explained. The captain isn't acknowledging his own role in the breakdown. He's placing all responsibility on Luke for not communicating, by which he means not submitting. The line appears twice in the film. First, when the captain punishes Luke for his initial acts of defiance, and later repeated mockingly by Luke himself just before he's fatally shot. This repetition transforms its meaning. When Luke appropriates the captain's words, he's highlighting the absurdity of claiming failure to communicate, when what authorities really mean is failure to obey without question. What many viewers don't realize is that Strother Martin's delivery was heavily influenced by his Southern upbringing. Born in Indiana but raised partly in Texas, Martin based the captain's speech patterns on authority figures he had encountered in his youth, particularly school administrators who maintained polite facades while administering harsh discipline. The phrase quickly entered the American lexicon after the film's release. It began appearing in political cartoons, newspaper headlines, and everyday conversation as shorthand for any situation where power dynamics prevented genuine understanding. During the height of Vietnam War protests, both sides of the conflict would ironically quote the line to characterize their opponents. Its cultural penetration reached beyond serious contexts. The line has been parodied or referenced in dozens of films and television shows, from The Simpsons and Family Guy to Reservoir Dogs and Rush Hour. Musical artists from Guns N' Roses to Civil War have incorporated the phrase into their lyrics. This widespread adoption speaks to how perfectly the line captures a universal dynamic between authority and those subject to it. Perhaps most interestingly, the line has been embraced by both conservative and progressive commentators over the decades, each finding different meanings in it. Some see it as a critique of institutional arrogance, while others interpret it as a comment on the necessity of following societal rules. This ambiguity has allowed the phrase to remain relevant across changing political landscapes. Strother Martin, who passed away in 1980, expressed surprise at how this single line came to define his career despite his extensive filmography. "I couldn't have guessed that 9 words would follow me for the rest of my life," he remarked in a 1977 interview, "but I understand why they resonated." That line speaks to something fundamental about how power works in any relationship where one side can enforce its will on the other. The enduring power of failure to communicate demonstrates how Cool Hand Luke transcended its specific setting to make observations about authority that remain relevant in any era. When we still reference a line from a 1967 film to describe contemporary power dynamics, it confirms the film's status not just as entertainment, but as lasting social commentary. The legacy: why Cool Hand Luke endures. As Cool Hand Luke approaches its 6th decade, the question arises, why has this particular film maintained such a powerful hold on audiences when other critically acclaimed dramas of its era have faded from popular memory? The film's enduring appeal begins with its creation of the modern anti-hero template. Before Cool Hand Luke, Hollywood rebels typically achieved some form of victory or redemption by the final reel. Luke's physical defeat but spiritual triumph offered a new model for protagonists, one that would influence countless films from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to The Shawshank Redemption and beyond. Director Martin Scorsese has credited Cool Hand Luke with changing how filmmakers approach protagonists. After Newman's performance as Luke, audiences were ready for more complex heroes, characters who might not win in conventional terms, but whose struggle maintained their essential humanity. That opened doors for the kinds of morally complicated characters that defined 1970s cinema. The film's visual language has proven equally influential. Cinematographer Conrad Hall's innovative use of natural light, extreme close-ups to capture emotional states, and symbolic framing established techniques that continue to be studied in film schools. The famous car wash scene created a new vocabulary for depicting male gaze in cinema, while the egg-eating sequence demonstrated how to build tension and community through a contained challenge. Cool Hand Luke's examination of institutional power continues to resonate because its observations transcend its specific setting. As actor George Kennedy noted in a 2005 interview, the film isn't really about prisons, it's about any situation where people are forced to surrender their individuality to a system. That could be a corporation, a government, even a family with rigid expectations. That's why it still speaks to viewers who've never been near a prison. The film's ambiguous spiritual dimensions have also contributed to its lasting impact. By incorporating Christian imagery without delivering a simplistic religious message, Cool Hand Luke invites viewers of various beliefs to find meaning in Luke's journey. This theological openness allows the film to function simultaneously as character study, social commentary, and spiritual parable. From a technical perspective, the film's brilliant ensemble cast established a new standard for supporting performances. Before Cool Hand Luke, prison films typically focused almost exclusively on their protagonists. By developing distinct personalities for each prisoner and guard, Rosenberg created a more immersive world and demonstrated how community dynamics could drive narrative. This approach influenced subsequent films from The Dirty Dozen to modern TV series like Orange is the New Black. Director Stuart Rosenberg's career never again reached the heights he achieved with Cool Hand Luke, but his influence extended through the filmmakers inspired by his work. Directors as diverse as Quentin Tarantino, the Coen brothers, and David Fincher have cited the film as formative to their understanding of character-driven storytelling and visual symbolism. Perhaps most significantly, Cool Hand Luke endures because it refuses easy resolution. The film doesn't tell viewers precisely what to think about Luke's fate or the system that crushes him. This ambiguity invites repeated viewing and continued interpretation across generations and changing social contexts. As Paul Newman himself reflected near the end of his life, some films capture a specific moment in time and speak primarily to that era. Others tap into something more universal about the human condition. Cool Hand Luke belongs to the second category. As long as there are individuals struggling against systems trying to break them down, this story will find an audience. Behind the scenes camaraderie. One of the most remarkable aspects of Cool Hand Luke's production was the genuine camaraderie that developed among the cast, a bond that mirrored the prisoners' community in the film and contributed significantly to the authenticity of their on-screen relationships. The demanding shooting conditions created a natural brotherhood among the actors. Filming during a California summer with temperatures routinely exceeding 100 degrees, the cast endured physical discomfort that broke down typical Hollywood hierarchies. Paul Newman, despite his superstar status, insisted on experiencing the same conditions as the supporting cast, refusing special treatment or air-conditioned breaks. George Kennedy, who won an Oscar for his portrayal of Dragline, later described how Newman set the tone for the production. Paul could have demanded star treatment, but instead, he was the hardest working guy on set. When the rest of us saw him willingly doing take after take of physically demanding scenes without complaint, how could we do any less? It created this atmosphere of mutual respect that you can feel when you watch the film. Before filming began, director Stuart Rosenberg organized what he called prison yard sessions, where the actors playing inmates would spend time together without script or direction, simply developing the kind of casual interactions and hierarchies that would exist in a real prison. These improvisational sessions led to many small moments that made it into the final film, the card games, nicknaming, and inside jokes that give the prison scenes their lived-in quality. Actor Lou Antonio, who played Coco, revealed that the cast developed genuine off-camera friendships during production. We'd finish these grueling days of shooting and still choose to hang out together afterward, Antonio recalled. We'd go to dinner as a group, or someone would host a poker game that mirrored the ones we were playing on camera. There was none of the usual splitting off into cliques that happens on most sets. This genuine bonding influenced how scenes were shot. In the famous box cutting scene where Luke wins the respect of his fellow inmates by refusing to quit a boxing match with Dragline despite being severely beaten, the reactions of the other prisoners weren't entirely acted. The supporting cast had developed such respect for Newman's commitment that their concern as he took apparent punishment felt authentic. Newman's leadership extended beyond professional dedication to personal kindness. When one supporting actor, who requested anonymity in later interviews, was struggling with personal problems that affected his performance, Newman spent evenings helping him work through his scenes rather than complaining to the director. This generosity fostered loyalty among the cast that translated to their on-screen dynamics. The camaraderie extended to practical jokes that relieved the tension of difficult filming. George Kennedy recalled a particularly elaborate prank where several actors convinced a production assistant that Newman required 5 freshly ironed handkerchiefs before each scene, leading to a frantic search for an iron in the middle of their remote location. Newman himself was known for using his car racing skills to playfully terrify cast members who accepted rides with him to and from set. Perhaps most telling is how many of the actors maintained their connections long after filming completed. When Kennedy won his Oscar for the role, one of his first calls was to Newman to thank him for the generosity that had elevated his performance. Several cast members would reunite in later films, specifically requesting to work together based on their positive experience on Cool Hand Luke. This authentic brotherhood among the actors helps explain the film's unusually convincing portrayal of prison yard society. The hierarchies, loyalties, and group dynamics that make the prison scenes so compelling weren't just skilled acting, they were extensions of relationships that had developed among the performers themselves during the challenging but rewarding production. Cool Hand Luke reminds us why we fall in love with movies in the first place. It's not just entertainment, it's a mirror that reflects our deepest struggles against conformity and institutional power. Through examining its careful craftsmanship, we can appreciate what makes this film a timeless masterpiece. From the sweltering authenticity of its prison setting to the carefully constructed religious symbolism, from Paul Newman's career-defining performance to the supporting cast that created one of cinema's most memorable communities, every aspect of Cool Hand Luke was created with remarkable intention. Yet it never feels constructed. It feels discovered, as though Rosenberg and his team didn't create this story so much as uncover something fundamentally true about the human spirit's resistance to being broken. Perhaps that's why the film has maintained such power over audiences for more than 5 decades. It doesn't feel like a movie, it feels like truth dressed in the clothes of fiction. As Luke says before his final escape attempt, "I never planned anything in my life." The character's improvisational approach to rebellion becomes a metaphor for authentic living itself, responding to oppression not with careful strategy, but with irrepressible spirit. If you've enjoyed these insights into Cool Hand Luke, I invite you to experience the film again with fresh eyes. Look for the Christ imagery we've discussed. Notice how Boss Godfrey's sunglasses function symbolically. Pay attention to the weather and landscape as emotional indicators. Consider how each prisoner represents a different response to institutional control, from Dragline's grudging accommodation to Luke's relentless defiance. Most importantly, share this film with someone who hasn't seen it. There's something magical about watching someone experience Cool Hand Luke for the first time. Witnessing their discovery of a story that has influenced so much of our cultural conversation about authority, individualism, and the cost of maintaining personal dignity. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into cinema's greatest treasures. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our uploads, and leave a comment below telling us what you think is the most powerful moment in Cool Hand Luke. Until next time, remember what Luke taught us. Sometimes a failure to communicate isn't a failure at all. It's the only possible response to a system that demands surrender of your essential self.